I'm J.G. Michael, and this is Parallax Views. Hey there, Parallax Views listeners. On this edition of the program, we welcome back to the show Jim Bovard, the libertarian gadfly, and author of such books as Public Policy Hooligan, Attention Deficit Democracy, and The Bush Betrayal. Once upon a time, Jim covered the siege at Ruby Ridge, a textbook case of federal government overreach. And now he is revisiting that case in light of the federal killing of Alex Pretti in Minneapolis, a 37-year-old VA nurse slain by U.S. Customs and Border Protection this past weekend. Many MAGA supporters were rather upset when Jim drew the comparison to Ruby Ridge, but he's not backing down, and he says the parallels are very real. We'll get into those parallels in the conversation to follow. But before we do that, I need to remind you that it is you, the listener, that makes this show possible, along with my one and only sponsor, Mike Swanson of WallStreetWindow.com. Other than Mike, though, this show is entirely listener-funded, and I could use your support at Patreon. Patreon.com/ParallaxViews. One more time, that's Patreon.com/ParallaxViews. A note to my $10 tier and above supporters. Please email me if you haven't heard your name in the producer's credit at the end of the program. I can be reached at parallaxviewspod@protonmail.com. Sometimes I am not getting the email updates on new subscribers to the $10 and above tier. So if you can, please contact me. Again, at parallaxviewspod@protonmail.com if you are a $10 and above tier supporter. And also, listeners, if you can, please check out WallStreetWindow.com, the website of my sponsor, Mike Swanson. Mike's newsletter offers the best financial and trading news, and I've actually had listeners make a return on investment from Mike's trading tips, so check out WallStreetWindow.com. And if you sign up to the newsletter, I believe you can also get a copy of Mike's free ebook, The Twofold Formula, the single best trading pattern I have ever used. So once again, that's WallStreetWindow.com. And with that being said, let's get right to the conversation with Jim Bovard. Welcome back to Parallax Views. A guest that I'm very happy to have on. He's sort of our resident, I would say, libertarian gadfly and rabble-rouser on this show. He's been on a few times. I'm speaking with Jim Bovard, who's the author of a number of books. I couldn't even list them all if I wanted to right now. But he writes at the Libertarian Institute and a number of other publications. I think whether my listeners on the left or the right are listening right now, I think they'll find him interesting regardless of their politics as we talk about the madness with ICE this whole month and especially yesterday. How are you doing, Jim?
Doing fine. Thanks for having me back on. Thanks for your kind words.
Now, maybe we should just get into right off the bat what happened yesterday. What's your analysis of what has happened with Alex Pretti and the just killing?
So you're referring to Saturday?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay. Hey, I was thinking, I was afraid that there might have been another shooting that I missed. So he was there to protest on the streets of Minneapolis at 9 o'clock on Saturday morning. He had his video camera out, and the DHS has been clear that that they consider videotaping ICE agents as a form of assault, and it's DHS says that's illegal, despite the rulings of every federal appeals court that has dealt with the issue. But so he was, the feds were down on him to start with, and then there was a female protester who I guess that one or two of the federal agents kind of threw into the snow on the side of the road. He went to help her, and then a bunch of agents jumped him and knocked him down, and they were pistol whipping him. And then apparently one agent grabbed the gun that he had a legal permit to carry and was walking away with it. And then I guess some of the other agents panicked and shot him at least 10 times.
Now, I'm curious, what's your initial reaction to how the state responded to this, Kristi Noem, and the usual gaggle?
Well, you had Stephen Miller, who's always been the voice of reason in the Trump White House. He said that afternoon a would-be assassin tried to murder federal law enforcement, and the official Democratic account sides with the terrorist. There was the usual thing about him being a domestic terrorist. I believe that DHS Secretary Noem said that. I think Border Patrol Chief Bovino said that. And it was amazing to see how how the top officials were so quick to completely understand the what happened, and there's no need for an investigation because God has spoken.
I was going to say, were you being a bit facetious there with Stephen Miller, voice of reason?
Do I need to wave a red flag? Hey, hey, I'm assuming you have smart listeners, okay? I mean, there are some shows where I say, "Now I was being sarcastic," but I assume that your podcast fans are a step above.
Well, I appreciate that. Now, in terms of this case, you've drawn a parallel between what happened on Saturday and Ruby Ridge. Take my listeners through, because I have some younger listeners that may not even remember Ruby Ridge, 1992. Can you take us through that, and then we'll get into the comparison?
Yeah, so it struck me as soon as the federal officials were commenting about the justifying their killing of Alex Pretti that it reminded me of Ruby Ridge. That was a case. It was a landmark case for civil liberties and gun rights. It started with the entrapment of Randy Weaver, who was an outspoken right winger. He was entrapped on firearms charges by an informant for the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Agency. A few months later, on August 21st, 1992, three U.S. Marshals dressed in ninja outfits with face masks illegally trespassed onto Weaver's Idaho land and ambushed his 14-year-old son and a 25-year-old family friend, Kevin Harris. The federal marshals fired some machine guns at them, killed the boy's dog. A firefight ensued. One marshal was left dead. As the boy was running back towards the family shack, a marshal shot him in the back and killed him. What happened was that U.S. Marshals then put out a completely false narrative of how that shootout had started and how it went down, and the FBI panicked basically, and sent in their snipers. And within 1 hour, the next day, the snipers taking position, every adult in the cabin was either dead or severely wounded, even though they had not fired a shot at the FBI, and even though the FBI never gave them any call out for surrender. FBI sniper Lon Horiuchi shot Randy Weaver in the back as he stood outside, and then he fired a shot that killed Vicki Weaver as she stood by the cabin door holding her 10-month-old baby. And there's a lot of parallels here. Folks, some folks know, yeah, the bad things happened at Ruby Ridge, but the feds were far more dishonest and deceptive in claiming absolute power here than what most people realize nowadays. The FBI initially claimed that they were justified in killing Vicki Weaver because she'd been outside in her front yard shooting at an FBI helicopter. This was a whole cloth fabrication, but this is what they floated. That story got shot down, and the FBI said, "Oh, we killed her by accident." So Donald Trump supporters say that there's no comparison between the killing of Alexander Pretti and Vicki Weaver because Vicki Weaver was unarmed. Not true. Actually, she had a 380 pistol on her side underneath her sweater, when the FBI sniper blew her head off.
Now, do you want to get more into the responses you got from Trump supporters? Because I think your tweet was what?
How much time do you have?
Oh,
Oh yeah. Just one or two more details. The Trump officials justified killing Pretti on set. Is that how the last name is pronounced?
yes, yeah, I
Okay,
believe so.
Pretti last Saturday because he had a pistol, even though a lot of conservatives have brought guns and rifles and pistols to protest in recent years. But one key is there at Ruby Ridge, the FBI had a rule of engagement. The FBI snipers were told that any armed adult male observed near the cabin could and should be killed with no warning, with no other consideration. If you see them, kill them. And that was practically the attitude that the federal agents seemed to have towards the protester on Saturday.
Was there anything else you wanted to add to that, or
That's a gist of it. It's it was the Ruby Ridge was a landmark case. There were a lot of battles in the court, and federal judge, appeals court judge Alex Kaczynski denounced that FBI rule of engagement as a double O 07 standard for the use of deadly force against American citizens. There was a massive cover up of that, but maybe that's something that you want to come back to in a couple minutes as we're drawing out the parallels of what else is happening there in Minnesota, or shall I comment on that now?
if you want to comment on that now, then we can get more into the parallels.
Okay, so a huge issue with what's gone down in Minnesota so far was the federal agents there seized the cell phones of the bystanders, who because there may have been other videotapes that gave a much clearer picture of some of the details of how the federal agents killed the protester. But the feds have that, and I'm not expecting to see it anytime soon. The federal officials also blocked Minnesota state law enforcement officials from conducting any kind of investigation at the crime scene. It was so brazen that a federal judge issued an emergency order on Saturday night to stop DHS from destroying more evidence. Um, it's unclear. I mean, for instance, body cams. I mean, most police departments now have them. Most of the federal DHS agents do not have them, and the Trump White House is pushing against that. So we just need to take their word. So, but it's interesting because there was massive cover-ups of evidence at Ruby Ridge, and the federal judge condemned the FBI for fabricating evidence, destroying evidence, and it was so bad that the chief of the FBI violent crimes section pled guilty and was sent to prison for destroying the FBI after action report on Ruby Ridge, which might have revealed that the FBI intentionally killed Vicki Weaver.
Now, in terms of the Ruby Ridge comparison, I also wanted to know you covered this for like national news media when it happened.
Well, I was covering this. Yeah, so I did. I wrote about it in a book called Lost Rights, came out in 1994, and in early 1995, the FBI announced that they were not going to have any real penalties for the supervisors and agents who killed Vicki Weaver, and then lied in court about it. So I did a story called "No Accountability at the FBI," and the chief of the FBI, Louis Freeh, attacked me in the article and said I'd basically malign FBI agents, and it wasn't like that at all. Well, there was a 500-page confidential Justice Department report, a civil rights investigation internal on what had gone down at Ruby Ridge. And I managed to get a copy of that secret report and then hit the FBI again in the Wall Street Journal and just walk through so many of the claims that Louis Freeh had made were shot down by the confidential report that I got. So, but yeah,
Didn't Free get angry about that article?
Freeh was furious. I've got a link to his letter to the Wall Street Journal in this article today from the Mises Institute. So people can read that. Yeah, it was a good sparring match.
Now, in terms of one thing you bring up is that there was a lot of threat inflation sort of going on with the Alex Pretti killing. Nome just coming out there being like domestic terrorist, domestic terrorist. It seems like now anyone we don't like, we can just call it domestic terrorist. I guess this is what the state does to anyone it considers an enemy.
Yeah, well, it certainly saves a lot of paperwork. I mean, Nome initially said that Preddy approached Border Patrol officers with a 9 millimeter semi-automatic pistol, um, and that he reacted violently when they sought to disarm him. I mean, the videos of the killing showed that he had his phone. He wasn't brandishing any weapon. And as I've asked online, why did the federal agents attack him, knock him down, and why were they pistol whipping him before they shot him and killed him?
Now, in terms of what is going on with the Trump officials' reactions to what is happening in Minneapolis, do you think we're going to see a similar attempt to cover up and put a sort of, as you put it, cloak of sanctimony over this federal shooting?
Well, I think it happened probably even before the body was cold, the body of the guy who was killed. I don't know how fast bodies get cold in a Minnesota winter if they're outside and they've been shot. So maybe I'm wrong on that. But no, I mean they were out there trying to spin the story within hours of the killing. And New York Times has done a very good job of shooting that down. There was a story in the New York Post this morning, and it basically said this is what the Trump administration officials say. However, the actual video shows something very different. So even the New York Post is not buying the Trump administration line on the killing of this protester.
Why was it important for you to draw a parallel between the Weaver case and this case now? Because I think it's an interesting comparison to make, and I'm not sure many others have made it.
It's important because there are a lot of conservatives out there. Okay. Well, let me clarify. There are a lot of conservatives who are mortified to see the power grabs that Trump is making. A lot of these conservatives hope that Trump would bring back limits on federal power, especially on law enforcement power. And the gun owner groups were thinking that Trump would be a lot better as far as being reasonable. There are other conservatives who are just full of rage at anybody who protests. There was a story I did for Counterpunch came out today, and it was it's interesting. Okay, I mean, I've lived in D.C. too long. I've been going to protests for decades,
Right.
mostly
You've
as
been
a
in the belly of the beast.
been in the belly of the beast, and often gone to photograph or write about protests. And I've from all different political sides, and there are lots of many, if not most, protesters. Some people are just complete assholes. I mean, I mean, this is politics. What do you expect? I mean, this is not tea at Waldorf Astoria. But so I'm used to people being ill-mannered and sometimes very obnoxious and loud at protests. But it's almost like some of the folks who are upholding the federal shooting think that anybody who goes to a protest should act like, should, you know, um, have knee pads on when they get there and just be very obedient and thankful to their masters. And it's just funny. It's to see some of the conservatives who claim that they uh, support the Constitution, except for the Fourth Amendment and the First Amendment and the Fifth Amendment, maybe the Eighth Amendment, whatever. But this is the kind of hypocrisy that permeates American politics, especially in the last few decades after 9/11. I mean, there was a sea change after 9/11. The government was put on a pedestal. It used that pedestal to seize far more power, and it has not been put back on the leash since then.
Yeah, I was going to say you can even connect Ruby Bridge in a way to the sort of post 9/11 manufacturing terrorism that
Yeah.
journalists like Trevor Aronson have talked about, where you basically had entrapment going on.
Yeah, well, it was clearly a case of entrapment what they did to Weaver. They were trying to force him to become an informant against some of the nasty racist groups out there in that part of Idaho, and he was not willing to do that. So they tried to destroy him. He had some nasty ideas, but I mean, he was up there living on a mountaintop by himself with his bad ideas. It
Well,
was
not
the
only that, but
feds.
does that mean? I mean, they shot his kid after shooting the dog, and then they shot Kevin Harris. They shot the wife. I mean, did they deserve to die just because Randy Weaver had bad ideas? I mean, it's ridiculous.
I agree, but I mean, this is something which I've did I think a couple pieces for USA Today on, starting in 2015 or certainly 2017 after Charlottesville ruckus there. I mean, okay, if you're going to fight extremism, killing extremists is not a good way to go because you're going to make a lot more extremists that way. And not only that, but the government should not have the power to kill people whose ideas that they disapprove. I mean, that was true with the Black Panthers 60 years ago, and it's true now.
Now, in terms of that Counterpunch article entitled "Will DHS Destroy Free Speech in Minnesota?" You took Chrissy Nome to task for saying that Minneapolis needs to set up peaceful protest zones and free speech zones. Can you speak to that? Like, where's your criticism there?
Ha, ha. Well, I don't know how many free speech zones which you've been to, but I mean, it's a little bit better than a penitentiary, but sometimes not much. These free speech zones multiplied after 9/11. George W. Bush loved them. I mean, they were all, as George W. Bush lied this nation into war against Iraq, there were a lot of protesters, most of whom the media preferred not to recognize as existing, but they would often be put far away from the media. There was a case of a protest out there in let me see where this was. Um, doop, 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 doop. Um, or did I trim that example from the article? It was running a little bit long. So yeah, so George Bush gave a speech in 2003 in St. Louis, and there was a free speech zone set up. As the ACLU complained, no one could see the protesters from the street, and the media was not allowed to talk to them, and the police would not allow the protesters to come out of the protest area to talk to the media. I mean, this is how free speech areas worked. At the Democratic Convention in 2004, I wrote about that for the Baltimore Sun. It was like there was a federal judge who called it an internment camp because it was basically stuck underneath an interstate in a dark area, and they had a net over top of everybody in case anybody threw an apple at one of the people going to the convention. Razor wire everywhere. It was like, and this is simply for expressing your ideas. There were a lot of leftist groups who were very unhappy with the Democratic Party going along with the war at that point.
Now, in terms of what you pointed out earlier with protesters, protesters aren't always going to be the nicest people necessarily, but I think your point is like people have a right to protest, people have a right to free speech, and the federal government is overreaching in what they're doing.
Ah, overreaching. Okay, so this overreach. This is something which goes to the key. I mean, Fox News in Minneapolis reported DHS bulletin says that the use of cameras and video recording at protests is unlawful civil arrest. And the Assistant Secretary for the Public Affairs at DHS says videotaping ICE, posting photos online, is doxing our agents, and we will prosecute those who illegally harass our agents. Ongoing lawsuit says that Nome has ratified an agency policy of treating video recording of DHS agents in public as a threat that may be responded to with force and addressed as a crime. That was that was the lens through which they were seeing Alexander Pretti on Saturday, I assume, because that was what he was doing. He was videotaping. And so, and based on this lawsuit claim and the statements from DHS, um, that was what got the ball rolling. That ended up with him dead.
Yeah, overreach is probably understating it. My apologies.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I hope you aren't going moderate on us.
Well, before we start closing out, I mean, one of the things I keep hearing from so-called conservatives is that,
That's a sad term. It's a sad term. But go ahead. I'm not going to quibble.
well, what one of the things I keep hearing is, well, it's like that scene from the Western Shane. Well, you saw him. He had a gun. I'm like, well, he had a concealed carry permit.
Yep.
I mean, to me, this is just a non-argument.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, he had a permit. The Minneapolis police chief, basically said he had a right to carry there. He was, and it was funny. Nome came out and said that he had brandished the weapon against the federal agents. Okay, if you're brandishing a firearm at federal agents, well, I mean, okay, that's suicide by cop, and it's almost suicide by cop. It's very foolish to do that. He didn't do that. I mean, there were probably some things that he might have avoided doing, but I mean, he saw the federal agents kind of roughing up a woman. He came to her aid, and then they killed him. So, and they were. I mean, it's to see how they've spun this. They've tried to make a big deal that he was not carrying ID with him when they killed him. Oh, well, hell, they had to kill him then. He didn't have an ID. So, this is like, are you going to kill people at random and then say, well, that person and that person didn't have the ID, so the killing was justified? I mean, what is this shit?
Well, also, I mean, and I think Marjorie Taylor Greene just pointed this out. Having a concealed carry is very different, like brandishing a gun and waving it. I mean, I feel
This is
ridiculous even talking about this
Well,
because it's so
it is
obvious.
it's profoundly dishonest on the apologists for the killing of the Minneapolis protester, because there was nothing that he did with his gun that would have been a threat to the federal agents, and if some private citizen had knocked down a federal agent and was beating him in the street as the agents were beating him, other federal agents would have been justified in shooting the private citizen who was attacking that agent. But it's just it's funny how the issue of the federal agents beating and pistol whipping him before they shot him has vanished from the radar, because no, this is serious. I mean, this is you know, he was a private citizen. He was voicing his opinion. And, they didn't have a right to beat him. They didn't have a right to pistol whip him. And they didn't have a right to shoot him 10 times.
I know you approach these things with a bit of dark humor at times. Is there anything you found particularly just pathetic about this whole fiasco? Bloody fiasco, but a fiasco nonetheless.
Um, well, I mean, some of the most amusing stuff is what I've seen on some of the responses I've got on Twitter. There was a tweet that I did. I mean, I felt like I was shadow banned on Twitter for many years, but the last few days it hasn't been that way. There was a tweet that I did about how the people were saying there was no comparison to Ruby Ridge because Vicki Weaver didn't have a gun. I went back and looked at the Senate testimony of her husband, the widower after they killed her, and he was very explicit. She had a pistol under her sweater, and that got like 55,000 views on Twitter, and a lot of very angry responses, some of which didn't spell so well. Um, but to see the instant rage and the vitriol against anybody who says, "Well, why did they kill this guy? So you're a communist too. So you're in favor of the pedophiles. You're in favor of this. You're in favor of that." I was like, okay, reasonable people can disagree about immigration policy. And I was at least one piece I did for New York Post criticized Biden's open door policy. So But if you don't worship ICE at this point or the Border Patrol, then apparently you're a communist, and that's a broad definition of communist.
What dangerous precedents do you think this sets? Because I mean, this standard is basically setting up the idea that, well, if the feds preemptively kill you, that's justified. We any individual, the feds can label you a threat and just shoot you.
Well, it's not quite that bad because as someone on Twitter was trying to justify what the feds did. Someone pointed out that someone had shouted "gun" before the agent shot him 10 times. So federal agents are not allowed to shoot you unless someone says the word "gun," and then they can't shoot you more than 10 times. So, I mean, there's all kinds of horrible precedents. It's interesting. Wall Street Journal last night had a piece. They interviewed briefly Trump by phone, and Trump was, apparently distancing himself or not. He was not embracing this killing as he did the killing of the SUV driver.
Oh, Renee
Uh,
Good, yes.
yeah, a couple of weeks earlier. I mean, he was hesitant, and a couple of hours ago, they announced Bovino's out of Minnesota. So, um, and this is not something that Christy Nome would have decided. This is way above her pay grade because Bovino has been so outspoken on these killings and the heavy use of force, and now he's out. So.
Before we close out, if you just have a few extra minutes, I wanted to ask, do you think too many people are getting caught up in the sort of partisan politics? I mean, I don't think this is a left-right issue.
I agree. I mean, this is not something, I mean, I've seen a lot of great criticism from leftists and liberals on the shooting in Minneapolis. I've seen some good criticism by conservatives, principled conservatives and some libertarians. This is the kind of, it's interesting. Going back to early 1994, it was one of those rare bright times of hope in the Washington politics. And that was after Waco and after Ruby Ridge. And there was a press conference, and it was the two groups that were leading it was the ACLU and the National Rifle Association. And those two groups came together to say, look, federal law enforcement's got far too much power. We need to rein them in. It would be great if the killings in Minnesota would spur some kind of similar unified response in the U.S. now.
Speaking of which, did you happen to see what's the former NRA spokeswoman? I don't know how to pronounce her name.
Dana Loesch.
Yeah, she was
Okay.
saying that she has questions, I guess, and is demanding answers about this shooting, which I guess is heartening.
Yeah, I mean the well, I mean the thing that set the gun groups on, made them, howl like a stuck pig, was that the Trump folks were saying, well, anybody who has got a gun at these kind of things has basically forfeited their life or can be taken down or whatever, arrested. And that is not the law in most of the country, or much of the country, most of the country. I'm not sure what. Um, so all of a sudden, I mean, the Trump people are trying to make gun owners presumptively guilty. And this was an incredibly unwise move for them politically, because the gun owners have been in the past some of the biggest supporters of the Trump administration. I don't know if that's going to be the case going forward, because you throw these things out and you lose so much trust, and that trust isn't going to come back. I mean, Trump is hemorrhaging credibility on issue after issue. So,
The last thing I wanted to ask you was, I had our mutual friend Sheldon Richman on the show, and he is like very concerned now, not just with this, but with what we've seen with. I'm in Florida, and recently there was a case of a woman who criticized the mayor
oh yeah,
in
yep,
Miami
yep, yep.
Beach.
And cops showed up at her door.
Right, because she said he doesn't care about the genocide of Palestinians. So the cops just come to her door. And what Sheldon said to me was he hasn't really seen a time like this in a long time. I don't know if you share that level of concern, but where are you at with regards to, how concerned are you about the current moment we're in?
About the current what?
The current moment we're in. I mean, just
Yeah,
with all of this police statism.
very concerned, and that's part of the reason. Part of the reason why I wrote the story in Ruby Ridge, because I was trying to put it in a historical perspective, and this is a flashback to when those rules of engagement were profoundly controversial, even within the Justice Department in that confidential report that I got, and in federal appeals court later in the decade. Um, and so there's a clarity from that, and it's interesting. A lot of the conservatives who are cheering the shooting and killings in Minnesota, um, if you ask them now, they would say, "Well, of course, I didn't support the killing of Vicki Weaver." But the key thing is, and I mentioned this in the piece today in Ruby Ridge. I don't know if I fleshed it out as clearly as I should have, but the issue is not folks who folks who no longer support the government after the government's bullshit has collapsed and the cover-up is in pieces. It's the same as the Iraq War. There were people who were opposed to the war in 2002. They were opposed to it in early 2003, and they were opposed to it long after. Then there were the folks who around 2007 or 2008 kind of said, gee, maybe this war isn't so good. I'm opposed to it. Yeah, that's better than supporting it, but there's a lot of reasons to distrust the federal narrative on the most recent Minneapolis killing by the feds, because they made a lot of false statements. They're shrouding the evidence, and you had Vice President Vance claim federal agents have absolute immunity, and this is like, I don't, he is not a good advertisement for Yale Law School.
And are you worried that this could come back to haunt conservatives and libertarians when a Democrat gets in office?
Well, I mean, this is a point which I made in early 2021 after the January 6th Capitol ruckus. I was pointing out that, a lot of the stuff that George W. Bush had put in place was going to be used against conservative protesters, and it was. They had a very broad net, and it wasn't just people that were violent. It was people who had bad ideas that the Biden administration didn't like. And the Biden people greatly expanded the definition of terrorist, and the Trump people pushed it even further. And when you're judging people by their ideas, this is profoundly subversive of a free society.
Well, I want to let you go, Jim, but how can my listeners keep up with your work? And do you want to have a closing statement? What do you want my listeners to get out of this conversation?
Hey, I've had 4 closing statements in a row.
My apologies.
No, that's fine. JimBovard.com is where I post almost everything I do. I'm doing a lot for the New York Post these days. I'm doing a lot for a number of think tanks. So I'm trying to stay out of trouble. But hey, thanks so much for having me on. Thanks for helping people understand the broader view on this, because it's great that you're not coming from a lockstep view from either side.
A special thanks to my $10 and above tier supporters on Patreon, who make this show possible with their generous donations. Producers credits shout out to those supporters: Aaron, Jeremy, Matt, Big Bob's Beepers, James, Enoch, David, Sadad, Tristan, Bob, Eva, Miriam, West Bank Robbery Pod, B. Lund, Transnatural Perspectives Podcast, Dan, Nick, Elliot, Fabian, Tom, Arlen, Bo, Spartacus, James, G, Jamie, Will, JC, WV, Sutra, Orc, Catherine, Darko, Nathan, Holland, Dan, Mark, Chase, Olm, Gary, Emilia, Nick, Brace, Michael, and Brian. Please join those listeners in supporting me at the $10 and above tier of my Patreon page, patreon.com/Parallax Views. if you'd like your very own producer's credit on each and every edition of the program. Until next time, you've been listening to Parallax Views with Parallax Views to Parallax Views with Parallax Views.
The way out is not simply to say, don't do it, just to prohibit. It's nothing else. If we don't do it, others will be doing it like crazy. So, we have to confront the problem. But no, basically, I know of the great anxieties, problems, new forms of control, but it's also new forms of freedom. This is why I always emphasize that internet and all this new digital stuff, it's a very ambiguous phenomenon, but it's the field of struggle. New forms of enslavement, but at the same time, new incredible forms of freedom. We have to accept the fight with no nostalgia for old, allegedly more authentic communities or whatever. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid.